Attention Vikings fans, there's something happening inside this organization right now that honestly feels like the beginning of a new era for the Vikings. And it's not just about the quarterback position. It's not just about who's carrying the football. It's about pressure, about timing, about decisions that could completely change the direction of this franchise over the next few years. Because while the rest of the NFL keeps looking at Minnesota trying to figure out what Kevin O'Connell is building, inside that building, the tension has already started. And the scary part? It feels like one big decision could shift everything. There's some strange movement starting to build around the market. And whenever rumors like this start involving Minnesota, I pay attention. Because even with a relatively crowded backfield already in place, there are people pushing the idea that the Vikings should make a bold move before the season starts. And the name that started floating around was Trey Benson. Yeah, that Trey Benson. The young explosive running back a lot of people once believed could become a true RB1 when he came out of college. Dustin Baker from Vikings territory suggested Minnesota should consider offering a fifth-round pick to Arizona for him. And look, at first glance it sounds unnecessary. This team already has Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason, Xavier Scott, and now rookie Demon Claiborne entering the picture. So why bring in another name? But then you start digging deeper and you understand why this conversation even exists. Benson is still only 23 years old. He turns 24 in July. And when he's healthy, the flashes are real. Back in college, he looked like one of those backs who could completely change a game on one touch. Burst, vision, acceleration. Talent was never the issue. The problem has always been keeping him on the field. Injuries completely slowed down his development in Arizona, and now he's buried on that depth chart. That's the part that makes this interesting, because sometimes players disappear in the wrong situation before suddenly exploding somewhere else. But that's exactly the type of player Kevin O'Connell tends to believe in. Young, overlooked, cheap, still carrying upside nobody has fully unlocked yet. And honestly, I can see the appeal, because Aaron Jones already showed some physical wear last season. Jordan Mason is still trying to fully establish himself. And Claiborne, despite the exciting upside, is still just a rookie trying to find his footing. So imagine if Benson arrives healthy. Imagine if this kid rediscovers that version of himself from Florida State. Suddenly, a running back room that already looked solid becomes legitimately dangerous. And here's another important part of this. Minnesota wouldn't need Benson to carry the offense immediately. That changes everything for a player trying to rebuild confidence. He'd have time, structure, coaching, culture. And honestly, there's something about overlooked players landing in Minnesota lately that just seems to work out. The question is whether Rob Brzezinski and this front office see enough value to give up a draft pick for him, or if they'd rather monitor the situation and wait to see whether Arizona eventually lets him go. Because one thing is certain. If Trey Benson finally breaks out somewhere else after being overlooked, people around Minnesota are absolutely going to revisit this conversation. And while the future of the backfield remains uncertain, another reality is starting to hit this fan base harder and harder. Time doesn't stop for anybody in the NFL, not even for players we've grown to genuinely respect. Because a prediction involving Aaron Jones started making the rounds this week, and it brought a weird feeling with it. Jake Beckman suggested that 2026 might not only be Jones's final season in Minnesota, but possibly the final season of his entire career. And honestly, that hurts to hear. It hurts because Aaron Jones came here bringing stability, leadership, and professionalism to a team that desperately needed it after so many offensive ups and downs. He gave this offense balance when things could have easily unraveled. But the body eventually starts collecting payment. He turns 32 in December. He dealt with injuries recently, and even when he was on the field last year, he didn't quite look like the same electric runner we used to watch in Green Bay. That explosive burst, those devastating cuts, they started fading little by little. And Vikings fans know how quickly this league moves once a player loses half a step. It's tough watching that happen to players who defined an era inside this division. But at the same time, maybe there's dignity in knowing when the time is right. Because nobody wants to see Aaron Jones dragging himself physically just trying to squeeze one more year out of his body. And that leaves Minnesota in a delicate situation. Jordan Mason's contract expires too, Xavier Scott's as well. So when you look ahead to 2027, the only running back currently under contract is Demon Claiborne, a rookie who hasn't even taken an NFL snap yet. That's a little terrifying when you think long-term, especially for a team trying to stay competitive right now. And then there's another huge conversation. Jordan Addison. Because while the wide receiver market keeps exploding financially, Christopher Knox believes Minnesota should act now before it gets even more expensive. And honestly, I completely agree. Addison has already shown he's far more than just an average WR2. He complements Justin Jefferson in a really dangerous way. Route running, awareness, separation ability. The kid understands football. Defenses already struggle enough trying to contain Jefferson, and Addison quietly makes that even harder. And the higher the salary cap climbs, the more expensive players like that become. So maybe this summer is about that too, about difficult emotional decisions, about recognizing which players truly belong in the future of this franchise, and which ones might be approaching the final chapter. Because sometimes the hardest part about loving football is realizing certain eras end before we're emotionally ready to let them go. Now, if there's one situation capable of completely dominating the emotions of this fan base over the next few months, it's the quarterback room. Because the atmosphere in Minnesota right now is pure silent tension. Everybody's trying to read signs. Everybody's trying to figure out what's really happening behind closed doors. And Frank Smith just added even more mystery to the situation. The new assistant head coach was asked about Kyler Murray, about the battle with J.J. McCarthy, and completely sidestepped the question. Classic coach answer. He talked about building a foundation, about everybody improving, about how it's still too early. But when coaches avoid giving direct answers that hard, usually it means there's a lot going on internally. Nationally, the story still gets framed as a completely open quarterback competition. But locally, a lot of people already believe Kyler Murray walks into camp as the clear favorite. Alec Lewis practically said as much. And honestly, I get it. Murray has flaws. He can frustrate people at times, but the raw talent is still undeniable. Experience, mobility, arm strength, improvisation. This guy has seen everything in this league. And Kevin O'Connell knows this roster isn't built for a long rebuilding process. Meanwhile, J.J. McCarthy is still trying to prove he belongs after a very uneven season. And this is where things get emotionally complicated for Vikings fans. Because so many people already imagine McCarthy as the future face of the franchise, the successor, the guy who would finally take Minnesota beyond the limits of the recent past. But the NFL doesn't wait patiently for development. It pressures. It demands. And when Sam Darnold left here and went on to win a Super Bowl in Seattle, that pressure became even heavier. Suddenly, the expectations around this quarterback room changed overnight. In fact, Darnold himself recently said he completely understood why the Vikings decided to move forward with a younger quarterback on a rookie contract. No bitterness, no resentment. And maybe that shows maturity from both sides. But it doesn't change the reality that there's enormous pressure surrounding this roster right now. Because if Kyler wins the job, people are going to question whether Minnesota wasted valuable development time on McCarthy. And if JJ wins it, every single mistake will immediately trigger comparisons. Every interception, every stalled drive, every ugly loss. It's delicate. And the feeling right now is that Kevin O'Connell is trying to control this entire narrative for as long as possible before the outside noise fully crashes into the locker room. And maybe the most human perspective on this entire situation came from somebody who's known J.J. McCarthy since he was a kid. Not as an NFL player, not as a first-round pick, but as a person. Greg Holcomb, McCarthy's longtime quarterback coach dating all the way back to middle school, basically asked people to stay patient with him. And honestly, it was hard not to stop and think about that for a second. Because sometimes the NFL destroys the natural development process for young quarterbacks. McCarthy has essentially played only 10 real games if you count last season as his true rookie year after losing the previous season to injury. And yet, a lot of people are already acting like his career has been decided. That's how brutal this league can become. Holcomb said something that felt painfully true. Nobody wants to wait anymore. Everybody expects instant results, especially when there's massive hype involved. And let's be honest, this fan base built enormous expectations around him. National champion, first-round pick, leadership, charisma. Everything about him screamed future franchise quarterback. But quarterback development almost never happens in a straight line. And maybe Sam Darnold succeeding before him made the pressure even worse, because suddenly the standard became winning immediately. But McCarthy is still only 23 years old. 23, that's incredibly young to carry the emotional weight of an entire franchise on your shoulders. And I thought it was interesting when Holcomb said Kyler Murray's arrival might actually help him. Real competition, daily pressure, the need to constantly improve. Maybe that's exactly what he needed. Because deep down, nobody inside that organization wants to give up on J.J. McCarthy right now. Not after such a short amount of time, not after the investment they made, but at the same time, nobody can stop the NFL clock forever waiting for development either. And that's where this quarterback battle starts becoming emotionally heavy. because there's a very real scenario where Kyler Murray wins right now, while McCarthy still remains the long-term future. That possibility feels more realistic by the day. The problem is fans, media, and the NFL rarely know how to handle patience. And until Kevin O'Connell officially names a starter, this tension is only going to keep growing around the purple and gold. At the end of the day, this is what makes being a Vikings fan feel emotionally different from almost every other franchise. Every single season feels like hope, anxiety, and fear all walking side by side. And even after everything this fan base has lived through, we're still here believing something special can finally happen. That's what keeps this fan base different. So now I want to hear from you in the comments. Who should be the starting quarterback when the season begins? Kyler Murray or J.J. McCarthy? Because honestly, that decision might end up defining far more than just 2026. Stay tuned. Skol Vikings, let's go.